Hello and welcome to our first webinar of 2025. I didn't want to say, I'm like, Amy, do not say Happy New Year. Peter, I don't know about you, but I'm sure I saw some funny Instagram videos about like, okay, I've been in my 80th meeting and it's now like January 14th and people are still saying Happy New Year. So all I'm going to say is welcome to the very first webinar of 2025 for First 30. We're really happy to have you here. And I'm very happy to be joined by Peter Domangos, who runs Succession HR. Peter, you and I just have so many folks in common, don't we? So it's been great that we've had the chance to connect and get to know each other, get to know each other's businesses. And this is our second webinar that we've run together.
Wonderful. I'm happy to be here, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm very excited to be part of this discussion today.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I'm going to also it's so funny, Peter, when you start these webinars, and I'm sure anyone on the call who's run webinars before, you start the webinar and 100 things like pop up as notifications. And you're like, Zoom, I'm trying to actually run a session right now. It's a lot to come up all at once. But I wanted to kick off by talking about something interesting that I read over the holidays. Peter and I were talking about it just as our little preamble before we got on this webinar today. But I don't know if any of you have read, and you're welcome to put up in the chat, if you've ever read or even tried to apply the 12-week year. And I wanted to bring it up just as a conversation piece before we got started, because it is, when we're thinking of succession planning and onboarding and maybe revamping, rebooting, or building from the ground up, I found this approach is so great if you want to meet certain goals, because you're not doing the annualized planning that you might have normally learned to do, but rather you're thinking in like 12-week blocks. Of course, it's going to add up to a year eventually, but it's such an interesting way to plan. So in case it's of interest to anyone, I thought I'd throw that up there. I know, Peter, you mentioned you haven't read it yet.
I have not, no, but I definitely have bought into it. In the 5 minutes that you've shared it with me, I'm sold. So
Yeah, okay. Well, I have no connection to Brian Moran or Michael Lennington, or anything to do with the 12-week plan. I just found it so interesting. And my other little hack now for business books is that I like reading fiction holding it, whether it's on my iPad or a real book, but I really like business books on Audible, because then I can take notes as I'm writing. And so I actually built my 12-week plan at the beginning of the year, and I'm very excited about it. So, and actually I've reached out to some people who come to our webinars, and they've been really generous in helping us formulate some of the work that we're doing. So if you're one of those people, I really, really appreciate it. Oh yeah, I see. Introduced to our team at the beginning of last year. Yeah, it's taking some time. It is a different way of thinking. That is so true. But I thought I'd introduce it just because, as I said, maybe it's going to help you with your plans to build your onboarding and succession planning this year. And I think it's a great way to kind of kickstart any planning. I also just wanted to share a little bit about First 30. Peter's going to share a little bit about succession HR. And of course, we're going to be talking about succession planning and onboarding as we go as well. But in case you haven't encountered us before, we actually provide very cost-effective and professionally guided, and if I may say, exceptional outplacement support to our HR clients who may be running layoffs. We are very cost effective, and I think that we're probably the top in terms of pricing in the industry. We start at $500 per participant, and that's for access to our programming for a year. So I'm always happy to talk to you about that, and I'm going to send a little email after this with a bit more information, just because I know that a lot of businesses, and we've been getting reached out to a lot. So if you are doing planning for restructuring, it's good to get a head start on the support you're going to offer employees. And we've saved clients a lot of money. So this just in 1 month, we saved our client $11,000. That's money you can put into employee onboarding and succession planning, right, Peter? It may not cost that much, but at least you'll have that for other employee programs. And we've got a great rate of reemployment. 90% of our participants are back to meaningful work within 3 months. So always happy to talk to you. I know Camara is going to put also a link to our brochure in the chat, and you'll see like we're very transparent and consistent with our pricing. So and we are going to be launching our employee onboarding buddy. So I'm not going to say too much about it now, but essentially it's a chat where someone who's starting with your company and getting started can learn everything they need to know about the business just by asking questions into their mobile device or using their laptop. So pretty cool. Stay tuned. And I also want to let you know, because we get asked this all the time, are you recording this session? Yes, we are recording. It will be sent out in about a week's time. Camara is in the chat and she will be sharing links as we go. But I also wanted to mention that you are also experts in some of these topics. So please share as we go along, because we would love to hear your perspective. And I'm sure that all the participants today could learn from each other as well. So it's not just about Peter and I talking. Please feel free to add to the chat as always. Peter, tell us about your wonderful technology, Succession HR.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, it's great to be here. Obviously, very excited to share a little bit more about Succession HR. We're a software that specializes in succession planning, as our name suggests. So we're the first standalone platform that exists in succession planning. We integrate with over 70 plus HRIS and payroll companies. Most of our audience is typically 300 plus employees generally. That's where the pain point of succession planning becomes very strong. And running it on Excel or doing it manually is very cumbersome. And we learned that firsthand. So my business prior to this was a software called Collage HR, still exists today. We exited that business a few years ago. And then I went back to the market, trying to understand different pain points in succession planning. And we put a board together, about 15 HR advisors that we post on our website, many of them in Canada that might be colleagues or people you work with as well and you recognize in the space. And together we put this program together and created the software, constantly adapting it. And it's been exceptionally well received in the market. So we're very happy about that, because it really was a pain point that wasn't being addressed in your traditional HRIS, and many companies were solving it or trying to in Excel. So we've been very happy about the progress that this business has made and the problem that we're solving. So
and it looks amazing. I got Peter to show me the demo one day and it was awesome. So we're checking out if this is one of your goals for the next 12 weeks, let's call it. Or the next year. Okay, so we're going to go through. It's really important to Peter and I that you leave with some ideas that you can implement immediately. I put a lot of pressure on myself, Peter, getting these sessions together so people walk away feeling, I've got an idea and something concrete that I can leave with today. So we're going to talk about what we've learned from working with our clients and some, I'm calling them pro tips here, to try to help get you going or keep the momentum going, whatever it is with both onboarding and succession planning. The first tip I would say, and I get, it's just funny. I was talking to a client yesterday and it's like, this is one of the things that is kind of a bit of a miss, is bringing people along, because we get stuck in the work we're doing, right? In HR. And we're like, we need to get this done. You want to get it out. That's one of the problems. But it really helps with the momentum once it gets going if we have people in our corner advocating and they feel that they were part of the creation of the whatever program you're launching, part of the decision-making process. Peter, now I'm throwing another book at everyone. But this is another good one. Have you read this one, Peter?
I haven't, but I'm realizing I have some homework to do after this webinar.
Yeah, I'll send you my book list after this. But this is a really good one because we don't like change, right? Peter and I might be a bit different just because we're entrepreneurs and that's the world we live in. It's constantly changing. We were just talking about our tech stack before we got on the call right now. But we are constantly having to be resourceful and changing. But sometimes when you're working in one function in an established business, you're not it's not required of you that you're challenging yourself with change all the time. But if you're launching a new succession program, if you're introducing succession HR, or you're changing your onboarding program, again, that is change. People probably have ways, like you were saying, Peter, Excel spreadsheets that they've been doing this all along, right?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
And it might be a flawed process, but it's something that they are very used to. So this book really helps us understand psychologically what people are going through when we're asking them to change, and then how we can kind of convince them and bring them along, as I was saying, for the journey. And I don't know, Peter, have you worked with clients where you're probably working with your HR contact, right? And they get really used to the platform. They're used to the idea that this is going to be implemented. And by the time that they're going to, launch this, they're really far down that path of, the change curve.
So I think in our case, and it may be tying into the slide that you mentioned to get before about bringing people together. The challenge that, at least in succession planning, we've seen for it to be successful, it's not just HR, but it's bringing other, what we call collaborators in the process. So when change needs to happen, it's not just sitting within HR that needs to change, but it's changing the methodologies that impacts managers, impacts, department heads. So I'm looking at your chart here. I mean, I don't know that it goes as deep as giving up. Thankfully, it's a high enough priority.
No, it's not. It's a good news story usually.
But I think it's just the reality that HR people are doing a lot of things. And I think most strategic HR initiatives, succession planning being one of those, it very much involves executives. It's a responsibility of an HR, but they're working together with with other executives in the company to make it effective. So it's business management meets sort of HR, or risk management meets HR. So we find that's when it's most successful.
Mm-hmm. And when I think of determination or giving up, and I'm sure this wouldn't happen with a software that's as easy and to use as Succession HR, but when we do introduce new technology, just in general, there's some people that aren't comfortable with it. So helping them get through that process, because that is where they can have maybe a dip in momentum, is learning how to use something new, even as simple as that something might be, learning something new. I know that in the past, we've had onboarding technology and we would have to set it all up for our clients, that was part of our package. Some people want to dive in there and do it themselves, but it's been our experience that most people are more comfortable having these things set up and not having to do too much of the nitty-gritty on their own. But you may think that whether it's onboarding and succession planning, whether it's just anything that you're launching or things are changing, like think going closed office to open plan, you're already through that change curve. And once you make the announcement, people are kind of at the beginning of it. It might not be as extreme in the cases that we're talking about, though. And then, when we don't have, and I'm thinking specifically, maybe not as much about succession planning, when we are imagine we're being told this is how you're going to onboard folks going forward, and here are all the steps that we need to take. If you don't have your kind of head wrapped around it, if you're not comfortable with that new process, you might feel helpless. And helplessness is one of the worst feelings that we can have as human beings. It really drives down our well-being more than anything else. So as much as possible, getting people engaged, which we're going to talk about a lot more, is going to be a really important part of this whole process, whether it's onboarding, succession planning, any initiative. I think like launching new payroll systems or new benefits programs, right? You want to definitely be bringing people along for that. The people in control of the change don't feel the same way as those impacted by it, even if it's a positive change. So helping them with that is going to be really important. So how do we bring people along? Well, and how do we get the resources that we need to invest? Because it's one thing for a company, because we work with a ton of companies that say onboarding is a huge pain point for us. I'm sure, Peter, you hear this too with succession planning, right? Succession planning is a huge pain point for us.
Yeah, I think a lot of managers don't want to do the work. It's just the reality of HR organizes things, and then, to what degree can we expect managers to do it, and how do we get them
Yeah.
motivated behind doing it?
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And often I find that organizations will say, this is a pain point for us, but then they won't put any resources, money, people's time allocated to actually achieving it. But it's like there's this certain strange expectation that it's just going to miraculously happen. So it's really important for us to help build the case to get the resource allocation for new programming in our organization. So one of the ways, obviously, you can present metrics, that really helps make the case, because companies want to know, and as you can imagine, you'd want to know this too if you're balancing your books. Yeah, I'm going to spend a ton of money on a new furnace, but what is the payback going to be? What is it going to be month over month? What is it going to be? Because I'm making this initial investment, and I want to know how it's going to make my life better and also help the functioning of my household be more efficient, right? So we want to look maybe for onboarding. New hire retention is a big one. And this is not something I find that companies have easy access to, this information, which always surprises me. But for succession planning, I just think retention in general, which doesn't tell the whole story, but it's one that you can quantify. With succession planning, I would also think that you're looking at engagement as well, which can be really important, but much more difficult to measure, right, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, you're right in the sense that retention or hiring within is by far the most priority. And with our customers, they like to see the sort of three segments: external, which ideally is the last scenario. Unless you're a growing company, you're going to hire external roles that are new. And then looking at internal growth. Is it internal in this sort of the track that they're pathing on in the same department, or is it internal in a different department? We call that sort of an indirect hire. And certain
Mm-hmm.
businesses want to see more of that, where they're doing various rotational programs through the organization. But for sure, the biggest priority of succession planning is how do we leverage the talent we have? Large companies, if we work a company of 1,000 employees, it's very difficult for HR to maintain the level of knowledge on all of those employees. And how do you uncover and make sure that you're leveraging the knowledge and experience that all that staff has? And I think without technology, it's very difficult to do unless you're very sophisticated in Excel. That's certainly the intent here, is making sure we leverage the talent that we have. A, the business benefits, and B, if we don't, and the talent feels, or the employees feel that they're not being leveraged, they'll just go elsewhere. So I think it's for
Right.
everyone's benefit.
And then that cost to replace them, right, can
That's
be astronomical depending on the role.
that's
Probably
right.
a lot of the roles you look at initially are the more senior level roles, and those are the most expensive when you lose someone, and the most expensive to recruit for. And then we want to help build the case for what does success look like? How will it change business outcomes? What are the risks if we don't proceed versus proceeding? So laying it all out, and I've kind of added some example metrics here. We want to reduce turnover costs. This is actually quite on the low end. You can see stats that are anywhere from 100 to 200% of someone's salary to replace them. I think that there's a lot of factors that you want to consider. So I think I'm always careful about going too far with these calculations, so far that people might not believe them. 30 to 50% is kind of seems to be everywhere, and based on my experience, seems to be fairly accurate. So if I were calculating turnover costs for my organization, I would say 30 to 50% of someone's up. You can average out all the salaries that have left, and you can do an actual calculation to say it is costing us X amount, like $250,000 a year, based on the turnover that we have in the organization right now. New hire turnover, we know that about this is going to be different in every organization. Some organizations have really good onboarding programs. They're not the norm, but there are some of them out there. And we know that for most, if you average it out across, it's 33% of new hires quit within their first 6 months. When I think of retention, and Peter, I'm sure you think about this a lot too, I don't just think about the numbers and the data and the stats. I think about like what is the impact emotionally on a team who keeps losing employees in that team.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
completely
So,
agree. And exceptionally valuable in succession planning because you're putting this time and effort into developing candidates and your people. And if you're not retaining them, avalanche of questions will follow us. You know, what's the problem behind why the results are not there?
yeah, exactly right. You want to look at the improved retention. So we see that organizations with strong, you could present the stat as it is, experience a 50% increase in new hire retention, which can be pretty meaningful if you have those costs for how much it's costing your organization. Enhanced productivity. Again, this is a tough one to actually measure. This is based on survey data. So they see that people who seem to say they have a really good onboarding program show that their productivity is actually higher. That's stated behavior. I'm Peter, I'm a bit of a research nerd because my background is employee and consumer research. So I probably dig way too deep into some of the background behind the data that I see. But I'm just thinking, well, how would they get to that number? I'm sure it's legitimate. It's just thinking through because people might ask that question as well. And then employee commitment, employees who receive effective onboarding, they feel 18 times more committed to their organization. And commitment to your organization and succession planning, it's really important too. You're going to make people feel more committed, even just knowing that you have a succession program in place. So if you were to take this, like I said, I want you to feel like you can immediately implement some of this. You can look at, the increase in productivity. You can actually just take the stat that I shared there. You could do the calculation for what it's costing your business to lose X amount of people and say, listen, if we could cut this by 10, 15, 20%, in the first year, here's how much money we could save. That's a pretty effective way. So if it's costing you, let's call it $30,000 to launch a new program, but you're going to be saving $150,000 just in the first year, that's a pretty compelling group of numbers because then if it's implemented, like you were saying, Peter, it can be a challenge to get the managers to actually use some of the resources. This is good for motivation in terms of making sure the organization has the investment and commitment of training and making sure everyone knows how to use these programs, right?
So, and this is where we think, I mean, not to promote our platform, but in general, having technology to make things automated and easy for managers. When we're asking them to get into Excel files that are built in a way that, us creating and understand it, it's difficult to get that engagement. But if it's in a way that's automated through technology, with the appropriate reminders where they go in and do what they need to do, I think that's when it can become effective. It's lightweight for managers. Excuse me.
I think too, with some of the onboarding program, we're launching the succession planning platform that you have. You're in fact making it easier for managers. And so promoting the fact that it's actually going to make their life easier is a good way to mark, because we forget that sometimes we need internal marketing. So that can be a really good way to make the case, but also to motivate people to actually utilize the programs and platforms. You'll see an expert, again, you can just take that engagement stat, or you can look for other research that you think more closely aligns with your organization. You can see the increase in engagement, which is really important now. I'm actually in the process of writing a bit of a thought piece. I don't know how I'm going to package it yet, but I am writing. This 2025 is going to be a challenging year for engagement. And one of the things is I think we're necessarily, given the economic factors and all of the kind of complexities in the world right now, we are going to see that we're going to need, I hate to say this, do more with less, but I think that is the truth. I think we're going to see the need to have employees working and being as resourceful as possible in order to meet the demands of organizations, because we're simply going to have less budget for more headcount. And we've seen that trend over the years, but I think this year we're really going to feel it. I hate to say, I don't like to be that doom and gloom, but I do think we're going to see that more this year based on what I'm seeing in my research. All right, so I'm going to check just quickly if anyone, like, please feel free to add your comments in the chat as well if there's anything that you've experienced, and ask any questions that you might have as well. And I just want to say high level. I didn't see your, thank you very much for your comments. I didn't see you there at first. It's so hard when you're trying to do this, like you're trying to read the chat. I need like two of me just to do this and be in the chat at the same time. Okay, so the third thing I wanted to talk about today is to identify sponsors and advocates in the organization, because as you were saying earlier, Peter, and it's such an important point, it's like anything we launch is only as powerful as the use of it in the organization, right? Its application in the organization. One of the things I love about the software that you've developed, and again, I'm not trying to make a sales pitch for Peter, I have him here because I genuinely love what you do. But one of the things is it's just so easy to update and to read and to report on. And I do think that that kind of technology does make people look good in the organization as well, because it makes it so easy to have it all presented and it's beautifully composed, right?
Thank you. And I wish I can take credit for a lot of that, but it's really been our HR team that we constantly will engage with, asking them who are in the field dealing with these challenges, how do we make their life better? Whether it's our technology or technology, I think that's the best way to look at it, is what's the pain point and for who are we trying to solve? And a lot of the times it's how HR can effectively run a program with other stakeholders, and they'll change based on what they're trying to do within that organization.
Yeah.
So it's thinking of it, how do we bring HR what they need, but also how do we get them to work with the people in the company that they need to work to make this effective?
Right. And sometimes I think that companies just necessarily, so this is not a criticism at all, it serves us well with our outplacement program, but companies can be very cost conscious when it comes to launching new technology. But sometimes it is the case that the more you invest, the better the outcome and the more money it saves you in the long run as well, because you have a sophisticated technology. Peter, listen, and no, I don't know what your pricing is. I'm not saying that Succession HR is super expensive or anything like that. I'm sure it's very reasonable, but at the same time, it's part of making the case, because if we get something and like we're still, oh, I'm just going to continue using Excel, let's say, then it's going to not be effective. So yeah, you're saving the money, but it's costing you so much more anyway. So in order to get everyone on the same page and using technology, identifying sponsors is going to be really important. I especially find this effective when we are working with companies with their onboarding programs. Companies that have that senior sponsorship and that person at the leadership table, and maybe it's maybe it's you, maybe it's an HR, your CHRO, right? So it does help to have even one more if it's your CHRO, because HR is often, like, everyone, marketing is committed to the programs in their department, sales in theirs. So it can also be good to have like a buddy for your CHRO if the CHRO is your sponsor. But identifying someone on the leadership team, someone in a key role, maybe someone that is concerned with succession planning. So Peter, I'm thinking that one of the key roles, if you're a sales-driven organization, is going to be your sales leaders, right? So that is someone who would be pretty motivated to make sure that there's succession, an effective succession strategy and plan in the organization.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly I agree with having, I mean, for us, it's a very obvious one. Leadership has to have buy-in, and many times it's leadership that's driving that decision, whether it's maybe even a public company, and we work with a lot of public companies where they have to show succession planning, optimization, private equity-backed firms, or even regulatory bodies that require some sense of risk management. I think that for succession planning, it's very clear that it's top-down driven, falls on HR now to make sense of it all. to work with everyone and make it effective. But without that, and I think at this point, most companies, especially post-COVID, where the scarcity of talent now, where you want to hold on to the best people that you have, it's become very much a priority to onboard them well, maintain them well, keep them motivated, allow them to have a successful pathways in the organization. So it's easy to get buy-in now, we find, at least. That's never really the
Yeah.
challenge, thankfully.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm like thinking of all the companies that must be so happy to have something, especially given the fact of what you're saying, that they have to demonstrate that they have a succession plan in place. I hadn't considered that previously. A leader who recently onboarded, we often get called when a senior leader in a pivotal role has been onboarded and they're like, what is happening with onboarding in this company? I feel like I had no onboarding, and I certainly don't want anyone else in the organization to experience this. So they might be a good senior sponsor of your initiative as well when it comes to onboarding. A leader with high turnover on their team can be a really good one as well, because they might be getting frustrated that people are leaving, not seeing the future. And maybe as they're leaving, that was part of what they commented on, was that they don't see a future in the organization. From my experience, because I spent many years in corporate roles, the above generally describes marketing. However, sales leaders have a lot of sway, because sometimes marketing, I don't agree with this, and I don't agree with this with most functions in the organization, but some of us are kind of have a cost center kind of brand over our head, even though we try very hard to demonstrate the fact that that is not true. But sales leaders are often the ones seen as like, they are bringing in revenue, so they're seen as pretty influential. So that's always a good person to have on your side. And I'm imagining with succession planning, they're a very good partner on that.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. Um, you also want to identify advocates. So looking at people leaders maybe who are going to be utilizing these onboarding and succession planning programs would be really important for you, because you want the people. Again, I'm going to keep going back to your point, Peter. It was such a good one, that you want your managers to be using, people managers to be using these programs. So make sure that those are people that are part of your advocate team. Colleagues who are excited about these programs. Some people are just not excited about onboarding and succession planning, no matter how critical it is to their role, and to the success rate of their team. They're just not interested. So you definitely want people who are excited, and are asking questions about it, or have noted it as a problem in the past, and now you're solving that problem. Folks just in general who are influential. Some of us are more influential in organizations than others. Some people like to be influential. Some people don't care. So it's good to find those people who are influential. Peter, interrupt me. I feel like I'm talking so much. So
No, these are great. I'll add one maybe answer if I
yeah.
understand the question correct here from Kamal, about long tenured employees and how do we think about succession planning when maybe, if I've understood correctly, the employee doesn't think that the retirement is on horizon. I think when we look at succession planning, it's not just those that are looking to retire, but emergencies. People go on medical leave, people leave for other reasons. And if we're thinking about being a custodian of a key role for the purpose of risk management and business continuity, very much in line with what we're talking about here with advocates, it's getting those in roles to understand that they're a custodian of that role. They're responsible for the continuity of that role. They plan to retire at some point, maybe not today. They might want to promote, they might want to move up in the organization. So you can't leave that position unless you've left the one behind in a very healthy state. There might be medical reasons why we can't leave, or personal reasons why we can't progress. So I think it's just looking at it holistically and protecting that role and getting buy-in and having these individuals become advocates. I will say some of it's cultural. Customers of ours in Europe, it's difficult to have, or at least we see that it's less often where the incumbent in the position is succession planning their own role. It's usually one level up. There's just some level of cultural difference where for many reasons, they still find it a bit awkward. North America, it's actually very different. We're much more open about that dialogue, where the incumbent understands that that's my responsibility to manage my particular role. And yes, I might be training someone that's going to take my position at some point, but it's not seen as a threat because they understand that they themselves are developing and they have their own pathways. So it's a very much, the cultural difference is not dramatic, but we do see a little bit of a difference. But again, a lot of that is just how we communicate with them, how do we engage them and make them advocates and understand sort of the business reason as to why we're doing this.
Yeah. That is, I didn't know that. I lived in England for many years. I didn't know anything about succession planning then, so I would have no idea what people's attitude was about it. But I can only imagine how frustrating it would be, and I've been there, to be in a role and you want to move, but the organization doesn't want to send you, not because they don't think you're capable, but they have no one to backfill the role
Yes.
that you had. Yeah. Okay. Pro tip 4, get cross-functional. Engage the organization, like the whole organization, right? Like, HR are amazing at leading programs. And I do think the people I know in HR, and I'm sure, Peter, it's the same for you, they're phenomenal, right? They take on a lot, but then they also do a lot more than I feel like they should, because people should be engaged. Not that people aren't engaged, sorry, but I think that there is a certain type in HR that wants to do great work, and they want to make sure they're helping everyone in the organization. But we need to be inclusive in these programs, because we want the support all around us. We want other people to activate. We can build, but we need them to activate. So these succession planning and onboarding touch every single department. So as I'm saying, I'm just reading off the slide here, but I phrased it, I think, so well. Being inclusive helps these programs be successful. And then, sorry, Peter, did you have anything to add to that as I move on?
No, I think I agree with what you said.
Yeah, just beautifully said, right?
You
The
got it.
perfect slide. Yeah, nailed it. Okay, so we want to also seek feedback and ideas. And this one I find can be tough, especially when we have a very clear vision of what we want something to look like based on our expert experience, based on the software, the programming that we've chosen. But doesn't mean that we can't build in other people's ideas and make them part of the process, especially when it comes to employee onboarding. There is simply so many opportunities to get insight that can actually be implemented as well. So for us, I don't know how much this applies to succession planning, Peter, because it's not my area of expertise, so I'll let you jump in. But when we will run a gap analysis for our clients. So what we'll do is we'll get a cross-functional team, people leaders, we'll get feedback as well from people who have recently onboarded to build. First of all, I say this all the time, so I apologize to people who've come to our onboarding sessions in the past, but I think it's worth repeating it time and again. If you are about to launch a program, succession planning, onboarding, I know there's so many surveys that go out, but a really effective, short, sweet survey to go out to ask people what their experiences with these programs are in the organizations to date before they launch can be great. Like you can base it on what has been done in the past, even if you didn't have an official program for it, because what you will benefit from in a year is the benchmark that you created. You ask the same questions a year later, and you're going to see a wonderful improvement in the satisfaction and all of these things. And then you're going to have something to look at and compare year over year as these programs get better. You'll get more opportunity to invest in them, and they'll just get more credibility in the organization. So if you're going to launch something, do the research, get your employee feedback first. So you want to find so moving away from feedback and research, which is obviously a comfort zone for me, get a cross-functional team together. So what we do is we get this cross-functional team together. We talk to them about why employee onboarding is so important. And then we ask them, what tools they're using right now. What do they find helpful? What do they need? What's missing? We call it a gap analysis. It's our way of bringing them along, but also finding out what is out there already and what we can utilize going forward. I'm sure this is the case, Peter, with succession planning, but if you're leading a new program to improve your succession planning in the organization, you really want to, there's been a need identified, right? If people are reaching out to you. So this is probably already done. And it's the same with onboarding, but it's often a small segment of the organization which has identified it as a need. The more people you can get to identify it as a need, the better.
Yes. And I would add, I mean, in our case, bringing cross-functional thoughts on the first step of succession planning is identifying key roles. There shouldn't be that much difference in a company if, people are familiar with, especially senior people, but there are different ways to look at key roles. I mean, there's some very generic ways, percentage of employees, C minus a few levels, director plus, but then there's like these different unique roles that in the event that there's a vacancy, the business would suffer. So I think the first step of effective succession planning is identifying as an organization, what are the key roles to this business, not the individual per se, but the role itself. It's very much, and I know the response here in the chat was appreciative to that point. I mean, we try and make a distinction that it's very much the key role, not necessarily the person. And I think that having that discussion up front and getting alignment on how that fits across different stakeholders of the business, I think is a very important exercise, which doesn't take a lot of time. I mean, it's a very intuitive one, but it's having.
Yeah. And, some people might not even consider what some of the key roles are. Like CFO might be obvious, but payroll might not be. I mean, sure, it's going to be obvious to people in HR, but in the organization in general, it's like, oh, yeah, everybody. Because if only a few people know how to use the technology, even for payroll, that's going to be a really, really important one as well. We want to collect ideas. I mean, again, I love talking. Like Peter and I will get together once in a while and just idea share about our businesses because it's just a fresh set of eyes on a problem you might be trying to tackle every single day, and someone else swoops in and is like, okay, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And you're like, oh, you know what? Maybe it's not exactly how you said it, but I'm going to try it. And then you can come back to people and let them know that, hey, like that was a really great idea and here's how we implemented it, or here's how we used it. It might not look exact, but thank you. Then you want to, of course, come on, we want to consult with Peter and I. But I actually put this up for another reason beyond the services that Peter and I offer. It's because Peter and I have a great network of other fantastic suppliers. So if there's other businesses challenges you're having, you can always send me an email. And if there's someone in my network that I think can help you solve a problem, I'm always a huge advocate for other really great entrepreneurs. And those are kind of vetted by the suppliers that you trust. So never hesitate, at least I can't speak for Peter, but I'm sure he's happy to help as well. But you can always message external partners and find out what they're doing. One of the things, I don't know if I put it in here, I used to do when I was in corporate is I would run a supplier day for my team. Because you can't always send people out to conferences. They can't always be aware of the latest and greatest and new technologies and new innovative companies. And especially now with the pace of change the way it is, it can make sense to run a supplier day. Dedicate a day. You can do it on Zoom. You don't even have to host people in your office anymore. That might be more fun to have people come in, but you can do it over Teams or Zoom. You have suppliers present. So you do like a 30-minute presentation with a 15-minute break, then another 30-minute presentation. You could meet 5 new suppliers in a day and just get them to do their pitch, look at what they're doing, see how it's the same or different or something new that you never thought of before. So consulting with external partners that you trust that maybe aren't just there to hard sell you is a really great way to build up your expertise in a space and to support your organization. This is a boring one. but it's an important one. Communicate timing. So setting a timeline for these programs. I'm sure, Peter, when you work with organizations, there is a certain time to get everything loaded and to get it out there, right?
Definitely. And I think most customers come to us with having some process in place. Yes, they're doing it manually, but HR has certain times that they do performance reviews and succession planning, talent grid reviews. So we just kind of support them in that process. I think without that, I mean, it would be very difficult to run any HR program successfully.
Mm-hmm.
But as many of us know in HR, you have a lot of things on your plate. So HR constantly being pulled away from different things. So I think setting a realistic timeline is very important. And usually it's towards some what we call like a compelling event. Maybe there is, in our case, it's many times it's a regulatory body that requires a report, or whether it's the executive team that requires certain statistics around these things. So working towards that. But certainly I think this is very important.
It is so important because the last thing you want is to launch this great platform and then have the or announce that you're going to be doing this or get people excited about it. And then their expectation on timing is so unrealistic. I used to work closely with marketing and it was like the deadline was yesterday all the time. So it's never fun to work to a yesterday deadline. To help staff checkpoints along the way, not say, this is when it's going to be like, this is our drop dead date, because anything can happen. So you want to have the checkpoints along the way. When you're ready to set a realistic launch date, set that date, because that will only serve you. And I always like when we launch onboarding platforms with our clients to have them test it first. Like you want to have a little bit of a beta test, even though the technology is sound. Anything can happen when you're trying to actually launch it in an organization. So that is really important. Develop a comm strategy. This one I find like I love this stuff. So this I find fun, but also incredibly impactful. I don't know if people on today's call have an email sequencing platform they use for internal communications. Peter and I being entrepreneurs, like you're going to get an email after this session that is coming from me. I wrote it, I promise, but it's coming from an email system that's allowing me, because think of like we had over 100 people sign up for this session. So think how long that would take me to write each of you individually to say, hey, thanks for coming today. Here's the replay or whatever it was. So you can do this in your organization as well. And if you don't actually know about a drip email campaign or running something or setting up internal communications, go and talk to your marketing department, because they probably have platforms set up and in place already, and they can help get you going, and they can probably give you access and give you an account so that you can do it, or you open up an account for internal comms and then you have it, or go to your internal communications. I looked at the registrants for today. We have some people from large companies, some people from medium, some small. So it's going to be different depending on the organization. If you ever want some insight from me into what we use at First 30, I'm happy to share that with you as well. You can send out pre messages, get people excited. It's sort of like when you're onboarding them. They sign the offer, get them excited right away. We call that pre-boarding. Get people excited for the launch of whatever program, whether it's onboarding or succession planning. You get the launch, you have your launch date, it's exciting, you're ready to go. And then, well, that looks complicated the way I said it, post messages, but I mean post-launch messages, because going back to Peter's exceptional comment right at the beginning, if people don't activate, it's not going to be a successful program, right? So it's the momentum can't just happen at the beginning or during, it's got to continue. And that's why I think email sequencing campaigns are so powerful, because literally you set it up once, you load people's emails into it, and you can sit back and watch the magic happen. I'm just going to remind. So I keep reminding people about this program and that they have and what they have access to. Did I miss anything, Peter?
No, I think that's wonderful. And I love your point about going to the marketing team. It's
Yeah.
it's obvious now that you said it, but they have all these tools in place.
Yeah. Yeah, I once ran, I used to do these ideas for HR videos. I think you and I did one together, Peter. And I did one with Ron Tite, and he's a marketer, content creator. You might know him.
I do.
And you know, he's spoken a lot at the HRPA conferences. So he's a friend. We've known each other for like when I worked in corporate, he was actually his company was one of our suppliers. And he was saying that, like, he gave that advice as well, which I think is exceptional. It's just like marketing and HR can work in lockstep and really wonderfully together, and it's worth doing that. This is the last one. Had to do it. Consider how we can help you. I know for first 30, of course, outplacement is an area where we can help you quite immediately if you need help. We can run an onboarding audit for you. We can conduct a gap analysis, so we can actually come in and lead those sessions with your cross-functional team members to find out what they need, what's missing, get some understanding of what resources you actually have. We can run onboarding feedback surveys, refresh and create onboarding resources, and automate the distribution of email and electronic resources. We also have a manager guide that we sell on our website. That's more generic. You can get that and update it yourself. It's got a lot of the key elements managers should know about having a new hire start. But we've also worked with clients to create manager guides for them. And of course, we also provide outplacement. So to get started, just say, because I know so many people, I just wanted to add this. I know so many folks are really kind of looking at restructuring now. To get started with First 30, I would just compare costs. I'm going to send out a copy of our information after the session so you can take a look at it and compare our pricing to the pricing you've been quoted or what you're using. You can check out our 4-minute demo. I don't make you talk to me to work with us. So if you want to do all your research on your own, that's totally fine. That's why we publish our pricing. And then you can email me with questions or book time. It's totally up to you. Peter, I'll leave it to you about how you can help as well.
Thank you, Amy. And I'll mention as well, our pricing is on our website. For the most cases, about 10,000 US per year, our average customer. And then it gives you access to everything from succession planning, candidate development, talent grids, skills, competencies, career pathways. Very focused in succession planning. Ideal for segments of 300 plus. Not that smaller companies can use this. It's just the pain point might not be strong enough. But certainly once you enter that size of company, the pain point is very obvious. We have several integrations. I'll touch one question I think Patrick had mentioned before around candidate pools for unforeseen resignations. If I've understood the question correctly, we want to look at it in sort of two ways. Succession planning, more traditional for sort of the growth and development, but then emergency or contingency planning. And you might want to look at those separate, where it's what are the key functions of the role, maybe look at in several individuals that can tackle various functions. So that in case there is an emergency, you can divide up the work across a few people. So a little bit separate in the thinking of sort of the contingency, emergency versus succession planning, which of course in our platform, you can handle both.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oh, I'm launching a new podcast. I don't know if I told you about it, Peter. It's called Your New Business Big Sister. So I'm not going to email people about it if they're not interested, but I thought I'd share it just in case. I know a lot of my friends in HR have, toyed with the idea of starting their own consulting firm. So I'm going to have a session specific to that. Peter, you and I should probably run an episode together because you're such a fantastic entrepreneur as well. So I'll definitely have my entrepreneur friends come on it over time as well. Thanks. I'm seeing some messages in the chat. So I'm really excited about kind of sharing what I've learned. Like you, Peter, I've run more than one business. And so I've learned the hard way in the past. And, I've seen the benefit of doing it as well. So, and I'm super excited to have expert guests on who can share their perspective too. But we did answer questions. I know we're running out of time. I haven't been amazing at time tracking, but we just have a few minutes left. So I'll actually leave it to you if you want to have any questions for Peter and I. By all means, you can get in touch. I know Camara, thank you very much, has been putting our information in the chat. So thanks for that. And you can get in touch that way. And you'll be getting an email from me after this session, just with more information about our program. And Peter, and there's ways for you to reach out to Peter as well, and you will definitely get the replay as well. So in case you want to come back, I know we've covered a lot in a short period of time, but thank you. I'm really excited for all of you. Peter, thank you for joining us. And also thank you, everybody. And I really wish you the very best of luck with all of your onboarding and succession planning initiatives.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, oh, thanks. I see. I love how Zoom now has these little emojis that fly up. I don't even know if I'd know how to do that if I was on a webinar myself, but I thank you very much for the feedback and for joining us today. Have a really good one. And I will just stop the session. So see you later, Peter.